Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Because Football podcast. This is your host, Andrew. And today, our special guest is James Doolan of Widnes, England. He is currently the local academy scout for Everton Football Club. James, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Andrew. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, pleasure to have you, mate. Glad we were able to connect on LinkedIn. I saw some of your posts and what you're doing and thought it would be great to chat because the scouting side of football and analysis is always something that's really caught my eye. I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg scenario, but playing football manager or even to an extent with like FIFA career mode, trying to find and unearth those gems and bring them into the club, I think has always kind of been, that finding those next prospect has been something that stuck out to me. So glad we're able to chat. And obviously, I'm sure a lot of people will take a lot of value from hearing about your journey, and we'll get into that too. But love to ask this question to start is like, what's your first memory of football?
I remember as a kid playing, and probably the earliest playing one was I used to play in London. There's a park called Hyde Park in London. So I remember playing a little bit of football there just because we used to visit my uncle quite a bit in London. And then watching football, I remember sort of being around 2002 when I really started watching all the time. So they're kind of like the earliest football memories. So that
Yeah.
first season I remember watching properly was the one when Arsenal were the Invincibles. So they're kind of my earliest football memory.
Yeah, awesome. That's quite a season to start, and then you're waiting for that to happen like every year, right?
Yeah. You think they're gonna do the same every year? It's
Yeah,
normal, don't you?
yeah. No, similar for me. I'd say like around that or like 2003 was probably the first season of fully getting into it. So for me, it's obviously like a golden era. But when you say you were playing down in London, was that kind of just like rocking up to the park with a ball, or maybe without, and just trying to get into a game or find a match somehow?
Yeah. I think the reason why I remember that one the most is the game FIFA, FIFA 2003. I think it was the advert or one of the adverts. Remember it had that silver metallic Nike ball, and I remember that was like we went to the shop in London and we got that Nike ball, and then after we went to the park after it was just like informal, but that's why I sort of remember that memory, I think. And that was the time we went to London and we bought the actual ball. So then after we went to the park, it was just informal, but I think that's why I remember that one the most, like sort of a youngest memory.
Awesome. That's huge. Those are such yeah, cherished kind of memories for me and attached to a certain time. That was like a classic era for Nike that obviously it probably for us because of our
Yeah.
age, like we look at it as a really kind of like unique. But let's fast forward then from, kickabouts at the park and all that to kind of how you broke into football with your first scouting role. Could you tell us kind of how that came about?
Yeah, so I'd played a decent level when I was younger. Nothing like too crazy, but I remember we were in a couple of teams where you'd get invited in. I remember we played Everton one game. And then when I was sort of 15, I played at Accrington, which is a League Two
Sure.
team in England.
Yep.
And then 16 got released. But my best friend from America, not from America, he's moved to America. He's now football coaching at a university in America. So I remember sort of speaking to him about it and saying I want to get involved in football again, but I don't know sort of the right pathway. And then I kind of thought about coaching, but then I was thinking the way in England with the FA system of getting the badges and all that sort of stuff wasn't as interesting. So I thought recruitment, and then that's how I kind of ended up there doing volunteer work. So offered to do a little bit for him with the university, but then ended up messaging everyone on LinkedIn that I could. Got a load of no's, load of no replies. And then with Warrington Town, the first team, so they're National League North. So
Okay.
it's two divisions below League Two. So I started doing some volunteer work with their first team. And then Preston North End, the academy, I started doing volunteer work with their academy. So I would normally work is in the morning, Saturday, Sunday, go and watch the kids football. And then Saturday afternoon or 3 o'clock kickoffs, normally getting to watch the men's football for Warrington. So
Mhm.
busy weekends.
Cool. What did that feel like when you finally got a positive reply back from Warrington or just a reply in general?
Yeah, you hang on to it, don't you? I think I remember counting the amount of messages I'd sent. I think I sent something like 60 to 70 messages and with no reply. And I think I got about eight no's and then one yes. So you just have to be
That's all you
persistent.
need. Exactly. That one
Yeah.
yes is all you need. Yeah. And so then with that role, went from Warrington and then also with Preston, you're kind of doing simultaneously.
Yeah.
now we've gotten to Everton. How did that opportunity come about? Is it like networking it? Is it you apply for a role? I'm sure a lot of people are curious
Yeah, it
kind
was
of
just
what
that
that pathway might look
application.
like.
Yeah, the job come up online, applied for it, and then was lucky enough to get it. But obviously, the if you didn't do the volunteer work, that would have obviously helped a bit because that was obviously on my CV, wasn't it? So, when you're putting in these voluntary hours, people can sort of sneer at it, but this is what in the future kind of gets you just sort of helping out where you can, do you know what I mean? And building a network as well.
Yeah, get your foot in the door right when you maybe don't have too much to your name of just saying, hey, like, and what were you saying as well? Because it's obviously takes a lot of like courage from you just to put yourself out there. Like for the first, even though you hadn't really had experience.
I remember going to so with Warrington, I messaged and asked if I could speak with them about it. And the manager said I could meet him at one of the preseason, so they had like one of the friendly games. So I looked at what the fixture list was, and they were seeing the team they were playing first game, and they had a friendly on a day before I was going to Warrington. So I went to watch the friendly. So I did like an opposition report on them, tried to break down every sort of piece of play I could, just so when I went, I had something to show, like that I've
Yeah,
got knowledge of football. I then went to the game for Warrington. Before the game, the manager obviously had a word with me. And then I'd pulled out, I'd spent sort of the whole night doing it. Because obviously, anyone that's done opposition reports knows how long they take. They normally take sort of 2 or 3 days to make them look decent. And so this one, I'd sort of stayed up till 3 in the morning to do it. Then come the next day, took it with me. And then after that, when he seen it, he actually said that I didn't realize at the time, he'd gone to watch the game. So he said that he knew everything that had happened and he agreed with everything that I'd put down on the sheet. And then after that, obviously said that I could help them out. So that was how
brilliant.
with Watson, I sort of got my foot in the door that way.
Yeah, and that shows kind of your commitment and like willingness. And it's a you were kind of your hard work was met a little bit with some luck in the fact that he was there and he could actually
Yeah, definitely.
compare and judge and see like, okay, this guy does know what he's talking about. Because that's something I always wonder about when I'm reading different reports that people put out, or I've done some of my own, is like, what I look for in a match and what I see from a match could be different. Well, usually is a bit different from what other people are seeing. And so how do you kind of like bridge that and see like, is it accurate? Does he know what he's talking about? Anybody could just like copy and paste things that they see and put it in a
Yeah,
report.
definitely.
But like that aspect that you guys had a similar perspective on things is really big.
Yeah, I think you've got her as well with the scouting. You're always going to get different opinions. So long as you've put the background work in where you've looked as much as you can, studied all the different areas and whatnot, and then back your own opinion. Maybe it's not
Mm.
always right, but so long as you've put all the work in that you know you can, then try and back yourself. Do you know what I mean? Because there's nothing worse than if you're going to copy someone and then you get judged on someone else's work. It's rather, at least if you get judged harshly and it's your own opinion, you can improve that in the future. But copying's, yeah, it's a bit of,
Yeah.
it's not going to get you anywhere, is it, in the long run?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're looking for like long-term sustainability and success and like building your name and reputation. Do you think like ultimately as an academy scout, would you say that like the picture of success there is getting kids into the academy who are then progressing, getting re-signed? Are there other things that that you kind of judge yourself on, or would you say that's pretty much it?
Yeah, because that's the hard thing with academy football as well as it's not just your opinion; it sort of gets filtered through, as a kid gets sent in. But I mean, it depends as well. Sort of like the head of what I normally like to go with is wherever you're working, ask whoever it is that you're recruiting what they're looking for in kids, and then kind of try and stick by that because obviously they're the decision makers, and the same with first team football as well. Obviously, there's no point if you're recommending someone who fits a different system and the manager won't go along with the player anyway, it's
Mm-hmm.
pointless. that's why I like to ask what sort of characteristics and profile and things like that someone's looking for, and then you can try and meet it bit by bit then.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction you make about like the realities of kind of the industry of football when you go from just kind of being like a fan or even somebody who's watching, kind of doing your own reports and things, is like then when you get into a real situation, you could be recommending dozens of players that you see some quality, you see promise in, but if you don't have this similar perspective of the final decision maker, then it doesn't matter like what you think ultimately. It's really about, hey, what are they looking for and being able to match that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I know it's even always like a bit of a debate when you speak with like parents in the UK because a lot of them will say to you like they moan about the fact that kids sort of get taken on by the athleticism or the physical indicators. But then when you speak with a lot of people who are involved in different Category 1 academies, either scouts or coaches, they'll tell you that to be a Premier League footballer, you need to be sort of like the tip of the iceberg, for your athletic profile. So that's why kids get judged so harshly on it as kids, because if I mean, so in England we kind of go off the four corner system. So it was given by the FA. So it's your tactical profile, your technical, physical, and your mental and social. The mental and social come under one umbrella. And so normally you sort of factor in those four things when you're making an opinion on someone. But obviously it changes as well by the age group. So if you've got an 8-year-old who maybe tactically is lacking in certain areas, it's not as big of a deal because they can be coached. Whereas
Right.
if you're judging a 14-year-old who doesn't know his position and whatnot, it's a bit of a different ball game because they've only got a couple of years before they've got to be ready. Do you know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
depending on the age and all these, they're all different variables, aren't they, for what you've got to factor in when you're judging someone.
Yeah, and would you say like you go to a match, you see one kid's got pace, he's obviously the fastest, one kid's the strongest, some of those things, somebody can strike a ball, even the technical side of things are pretty apparent, right? You can tell who's got control, who's able to keep a ball or not. Um, for me, what comes to mind is it seems like kind of that mental social side is tougher to judge. Would you agree with that? That that's kind of like one of the most difficult to really get an assessment of as a scout.
Yeah, definitely. But and then also I think probably it's maybe the most important as well. There's a Chelsea scout, Chris Robinson. He's got quite a lot of interview footage on. He's got his own company, and he often talks about how some of the best players he's seen through Chelsea's system weren't the ones that ended up going on to play. It was the ones who maybe were middle of the road, but mentally they were the most robust. And I find that as well. The kids that I've seen in like academy setups, there's a lot of times where maybe out of four kids, they're sort of one of the middle ones, but just because they back themselves, they've got the mentality and whatnot, they end up going further than maybe some of the other kids. There's a lad I know, he's in at a different team. He's in at he's one of the championship academies, this lad. But uh, what sort of stands him out is his mental attributes. He's sort of the type of player where he relishes a challenge a little bit. And so I think that's what's kicked him on to being at the team that he's at now is he's done that. And he's always constantly looking to improve. So he's got that as in his mentality as well. He's always looking for feedback. I know that a lot of the times his dad has asked other scouts and whatnot for feedback. So he's just really open to improvement and criticism as well as taking on these challenges.
And I would agree, like from my own experience, from people I talk to, from what I observe, like the mental aspect is the most difficult to become a professional, like not only just the journey through the academy, all the setbacks, injuries, and then once you get to the professional level, there's a whole nother thing when you come to the money involved, the wealth involved, the social side of things, friends, family, all those challenges. How do you as a scout, especially for kids, you're saying you're mostly scouting players under 16 generally?
Yeah.
how do you get a sense of their mentality? Like, what do you look for in a match? Are you able to talk to them after matches or to their coaches? Like, how do you try to get like a good read on their mental aspects, their personality, and if they are going to maybe have that mental fortitude and attitude to make it at the highest level?
Yeah, well, normally if I'm watching even like adults football, same in the first team, if I'm doing an opposition report, try and get there early, watch the warm up, see how they're sort of socializing with all the other players and whatnot, what they're like communicating, the an introvert and extrovert. And then also looking for things like, and again, this sort of applies to first team, is when they hit sort of roadblocks in games, how do they then react after it? So you'll see some players where the game's all going their way and they look great, but then maybe you see a different game where it's not going all their way, and then you'll see some players they'll go one way where they sort of relish the challenge and then they sort of rise to it, and then you'll see other lads where they go missing in the game, and you'll say, I haven't seen him the whole game, but maybe he's just, gone off, got shy to getting on the ball and things like these. You want to see that's another thing as well, bravery. Like, there's a lot of players where maybe they'll try and look like they're unavailable, but really it's because they're not making themselves available. Do you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? So these are all different indicators you'd look at to try and judge mentality, but it is a difficult one.
How many times do you think you need to see a player to be comfortable recommending them?
It depends again at the age groups. Obviously, if you were seeing like a young kid, but you had every sort of base covered, maybe one after one game, like I was saying before, depending on the age group, maybe the mentality wouldn't necessarily be the strong, wouldn't matter as much because they're only young kids. You know what I mean? They can develop, face these different challenges. But if you're 14, 15, then you've got a lot of adversity to. So maybe then the mental ranks even higher than, if you were younger. So
Mm-hmm.
it just depends on the age group again. But I mean, if you were older, I'd definitely, well, even most kids definitely normally try and say at least 3 games. You see 3 different games where different situations come up and whatnot. Maybe then, but I'd say 3 games is a minimum. And then after that, I mean, first team, you'd want even more. If you were scouting for someone's first team,
Mm-hmm.
you'd want to have the data, you'd want to have previous knowledge of previous seasons and things like that. Because I know doing first team scouting, there's times where maybe a player's having a fantastic season, but he's 26 and you wonder why it's not happened before. Maybe there's factors like if it's a centre forward, maybe he's in a good setup where someone else is doing a lot of the headwork, and maybe that's why. I mean, I know there's like a lot of examples in there transfers where players doing well at one club, he goes to another team and then folds at the next team
Yeah,
because the setup's not the same at the next team he's gone to.
exactly. Yeah, whether it's the coach and how he feels a part of the squad, or the kind of the chemistry with other players, as you mentioned. Sometimes it's just purely personal things too, or trying to make that step up. There's kind of so much that gets involved with it. And so for these matches, like I'm imagining then, when we're talking about scouting for the academy level of younger kids, I can't imagine there's a ton of like video. So you're just rolling
Oh,
up to pitches all over kind of you said you kind of have that Warrington area. So you're just finding yourself at all the different clubs and parks and pitches like all through the weekend.
yeah, usually, so everyone sort of knows which players to look at and which ones not to. At academy level, that's why networking is so important at academy level as well. Obviously, people will try and network with different coaches and whatnot because then you can get different information. But I mean, normally it depends as well the resources because category 3 teams, what they have to think about is normally they don't have as many scouts to watch games. So maybe for them, depending on your category, maybe it's better for them to go to sort of hub pitches, where maybe more than one game is going on at a time, and then category 1 academies have more resources so they can cover more pitches and get more games. So depending on the resources as well, it sort of differs.
Mm-hmm. What's your like routine, or do you have any rituals? Like I'm thinking as a myself as a coach for a while, like I know what it's like getting up early on the Saturday. You just worked, all week, and then you're getting up early on the Saturday. Like, do you have any certain like, hey, all I need is my coffee and I've got my notebook and I'm good to go? Or like, or where do you like to position yourself at the field? Are you ever talking to people? Are you in the corner? Like, kind of walk us through, a likely gray, wet, chilly Saturday morning in the witness area.
Yeah, yeah. I don't really have any rituals. I mean, other than I'll always take a notebook everywhere I go, only in case your phone fails and whatnot. And then also with first team, you want to take notes anyway. But normally I'll always have a notebook as well, just because you can draw different things that are going on. So sometimes I like to make sort of little annotations or whatnot, just so I know what I'm talking about and also I have like little shorthand references where if I'm noting rather than write the whole thing out. This was something a more experienced scout kind of told me. He had different shorthand techniques for set pieces. So rather than put defending a corner, blah blah blah,
Mm-hmm.
marking, he just have like four letters. So rather than he knew off them four letters, it was defending a corner, man marking, and then he'd put the different notes about the man marking after it. So all these different little shorthand techniques as well with the notes, but normally positioning. Um, I mean, if it's just a grassroots game, normally somewhere in the middle of the pitch, somewhere just so you've got a decent view. It doesn't really matter to me, to be honest, with the grassroots. And then with first team, if it's live scouting, I normally try and get in early because I want the seat right at the top of the main stand in the middle, just
Mm,
so you've got that overview of everything that's going on below you. Because it's hard at ground level. It's much harder getting a perspective for things like
absolutely.
the positioning and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually, like a few weeks ago, I was back home in the States and went to a match for our local MLS club, the Union. And it was like field side tickets. I was very fortunate. I was very happy. It's, like a VIP type of experience, but it was
Yeah,
really tough to get a read on the game. And I was thinking, like, oh, this is like, obviously I've stood on the sidelines as a player, as a coach, at a youth level a lot. But then I was even thinking, wow, as a coach, like, it's difficult to even get a great read on movement from that level because normally I'm used to sitting up higher and you get a much, to your point, a much better like bird's eye view and able to see things. So that it was just kind of like a more recent experience, and I think being in an actual professional setting like really kind of impressed that upon me.
I seen Gary Neville said something about that as well. He has those podcasts with
Yeah.
the overlap ones. One of them, he said when he worked at Valencia, he didn't realize how sort of top level managers can make those small tweaks and decisions at ground level where he can't see the overview of the game. And then he said, but obviously when you're above the game, he said he feels like he can pick out points of a game perfect. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's why a lot of the coaches now they have analysts as well, don't they? If you see a lot of them sort of on the touchline, you'll see them getting the iPad out. They'll be getting fed video just so they can get an overview of what's going on in the game as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of become more like the American sports that way, isn't it? Like the
Exactly. Yeah, like American football, they've got all these coaches up in the top, and then they've got their headphones and they're talking the whole match. I was just at a game the other day here, and it was for some bigger clubs, and they had that too, where they had their analyst up with the computer, they had their video
yeah.
guy, and then they had they're chatting constantly to the coaches because it's more information, more feedback to give. Um, what do you feel like? So you obviously we talked a lot about your academy scouting, but then you've done some like first team and like opposition scouting as well.
Yeah.
How, what do you look for that's different? I imagine it's not quite as maybe detailed on a personal level. Maybe it is. Like how would you kind of like describe your preparation and your mindset for doing the opposition report versus talent scouting and looking for players academy level?
Yeah, opposition's really difficult, especially if it's live and there's no video to go back and sort of watch after, because it's a lot of note taking, but then also it's that balance between taking notes and then sort of also watching what's going on. I know for me, normally the first 30, 40 minutes is when I'll be taking the most notes, just because that's kind of when you can see what they're trying to implement. And in the second half, maybe they're reacting to things, maybe the teams are fading, stuff like that. So first 30 minutes, try and get sort of notes on the shape, how they like to build up, what do they do in and out of possession, what do they do in transition. So if they win the ball in the middle third, counter attack, what do they like to do? Same again, defending. So if they give the ball away, how do they
Hmm.
react to transition there? And then also just a little bit about maybe I do normally play. It depends. You sort of normally ask the coaches as well. So normally you say to the coach, what do you want to see in an opposition report? Um, I've had like ones before where you'll just sort of give a vague summary, maybe of all the players. Some people don't like any player summary, so depends. I know there's a professional team scout. He says that they rather than do all player summaries, they just pick out a few key players in the team and then what the strengths and weaknesses are, the key players. So it's dependent again as well what the manager asks you to do. But I mean, far more prep work goes into the opposition stuff than the. I mean, obviously, you'll do the same with the live scouting for players, but I mean, before the game, you'll want to know what systems they use before players. Even I'll watch managers' interviews just to see if I can get an insight why they did certain things, injury records with
Hmm.
players, the players coming back. So, I mean, the opposition stuff takes a lot of time to do prep work for as well, but it's each to their own. Some people don't like doing the opposition stuff; they only like doing player stuff, and then vice versa. But I'd I don't have like a preference on either, to be honest. I kind of like with the opposition stuff. I like more the feeling of it being a bit like unpacking a jigsaw. Do you know where you're trying to put the puzzle pieces together? What did he do? This set pieces, and then obviously you have more of a feeling into the match day because then when the team plays in the match day, you feel like you sort of contributed the whatnot to the report. But with obviously recruitment, it's not necessarily like that. It's more, I know, depending on what level of recruitment you're in as well, you'll get so like, I know some people are more heavy into the negotiating side, but for most of the first team scouts, you won't even be any part of that. It'll be more like you're planning for the next 12 months. Do you know what I mean? So on the short term basis, you don't have as much of an impact. So it depends what you prefer, but I like doing both.
And it sounds like from what you're saying, it's a lot of the in-person scouting. It's obviously there's certain types of notes and data marks you're making, but it's different from like what we're seeing now with a more, let's call it like modern, where we're plugging into all these different programs and platforms, and you're not learning like Python and different coding languages, and doing the heat maps and all that. It sounds like a little bit more traditional, just because of, in many cases, especially with the academy or even the live scouting, like you just don't have the infrastructural like ability to do that. Is that right?
Um, yes and not, and even so, it might surprise like some people, even at like six tier in the English division, there's a lot of data still getting used. It's not necessarily as detailed as the data for the leagues above, only because it's not available. So a lot of them they'll use maybe like Y Scout Huddle, they'll get the data off that, but that's known to be less reliable than maybe sort of other data pipelines. Like you've got Stats Bomb, they get used a lot for like sort of the football league. So, but there is sort of normally what I like to do is sort of go through the data as well before, just to see if there's any sort of reoccurring things. So after obviously seeing it, like maybe someone's scored so many goals, and you think that's a bit of on the low end, for that. So maybe if they're a top division side, they've scored sort of 8 goals less than the rest of the top division sides. And then you go, why is that happening? And then you sort of, it's that investigation, isn't it? See whether it's something credible that you can mention, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just coincidence. So there's a lot of different factors again. I mean, I was speaking with another opposition scout. He said it's kind of a bit of um, give or take. You're trying to experiment with what fits you for that game as well. So, and then the time period you're given. So, in England, a lot of the football league games are Saturday and Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
So the time management that you have to do as well to make sure you can get reports out regularly every.
Yeah.
Um,
So you got to crunch those Sundays. Sunday you got to get it
definitely, yeah.
get it in for
And at
Sunday
the
night,
top end, it's
Monday for the
okay
Tuesday
because
match.
they have more scouts at the top end, but if you're at the bottom end, you might be doing it yourself, as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So it's fascinating to kind of hear of how you kind of put your journey together. And I know you've also been doing some freelance aspects, trying to get yourself out there a little bit more too, and focusing specifically on different African leagues as well. So what kind of like led you to choose that region of the world, and what could you share about with us, like what you've kind of learned and what insight you've gotten after following and trying to scout like African markets for the the last period of time?
Yeah, so like getting advice from other scouts, I always like to try and get like feedback on a lot of scouts. And um, one of the scouts, Liam Henshaw, he's quite active online. Anyone that'd like to follow him, he gives a lot of advice out, but he always talks about picking a niche. And at the time, I was watching bits of South American football, but and I didn't feel like I had enough of sort of a knowledge base to kind of. There's a lot of people who already cover South American football,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you'll see online like Copper Club and all these other ones who cover South American football, and I knew it was going to be sort of a hard task, kind of competing in that field. So speaking around with other scouts, I already watched a bit of West African football. There's sort of different services you can get to watch it for free. Started off watching the Benin League and a few of the other ones. And speaking with other scouts as well, it's kind of like it's one of the places which is the hardest to watch games because it's obvious they don't have the same setup for where there's replays and all that other stuff. There's not as much coverage, so it's more valuable as well in a sense. So I decided to pick West African as sort of like a niche, and then go into all those countries. So um, I've got a decent knowledge base of most of them. I'd say probably the one I know the least right now, which I'm trying to catch up on, is Ghana, and that's just because again, Ghana's quite well covered already in West Africa, so I
Hmm.
thought I'll start off covering the ones that aren't as well covered. So,
Yeah,
um, yeah, I went through watching all the different games there. It's hard again because I've already got different roles. It's that time management thing of
yeah,
trying to
exactly.
allocate time every day to watch certain football. So, but yeah, I enjoy doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like what you were saying there echoes a lot of the conversations that I'd had like earlier this year going to the African Cup of Nations and starting to learn more about African football myself. And like there's obviously certain countries around the continent that have more of a pedigree and like tradition of success. Like you mentioned, Ghana is one, Nigeria as well. We've seen like on a national team level, Ivory Coast too. But then when you get into the actual domestic leagues, it can be a much different situation. And then even within that, like you said, it's a challenge. Like one of the main things I've heard from scouts, from agents, people within football is just like the challenge is just to get the data and get video and then like
Yeah.
reliable data as well.
There's also like a lot of networking, so like it's who do you know where you can get video from? Can you do can you do favors, for certain people as well to try and get information? So you've got to be a bit creative with it. And then even like things like you take for granted with European football, like you get the team sheets. There's games
Yeah.
where I've been watching a game and then you'll say, I like number 10. I want to watch him more closely. And then you'll start looking and you struggle to find who number 10 is. And then it's so what I've tried to do is kind of reach out to different people who sort of maybe someone who watches Burkina Faso football all the
Hmm.
time,
Yeah.
Gambia football, and then if I'm missing bits where I'm wondering who a certain player is because I like them, then go to them and say, "Do you know about this player? Because I really like them." And then at the moment, I'm trying to also do sort of a couple of collaboration pieces. So there's people who are journalists and whatnot in Africa that have said they like the reports that I do. Would I be interested? And I said, yeah, we could maybe do something where we collaborate on a piece and things like that. So just trying to get in different ways. You've got to be creative with the African markets though, but then I know that's the fun of it as well because it's not as sort of straightforward as other leagues.
Yeah, exactly. And you said like trying to find somebody who watched like the Burkina Faso league. Is that looking for journalists, looking for like anybody, any technical staff on LinkedIn? Like how are you making these connections?
Yeah, so LinkedIn's obviously the biggest one. Any sort of up and coming scouts, I think you've got to be on LinkedIn because it's that valuable. For all the sort of feedback I've got off work from LinkedIn, networking through LinkedIn. I think almost every position that I've had is from LinkedIn as well. So shows you how important networking is. But
Yep.
um, yeah, just so even what I'll normally do as well. So like there was a instance with a Nigerian team where I really liked them. And so I just reached out with their coach on social media and then the coach, we had a conversation. It wasn't like anything formal, just informal conversation about a player that I liked. And then there's even times where sort of I'll see who's engaging in certain content. So if I like sort of like Gambian football, I'll see which podcast there's a podcast in Gambia that covers a lot of the Gambian football. So I'll
Okay.
see who's sort of engaging in the content, and then sort of if I can ask them questions, that way. So all these different methods. I've had a lot of people as well, even where I've just done reports. So I did a report that blew up a little bit on Sekou Kone. He's ended up going to Manchester United. He was
Hmm.
a standout player in the under 17s World Cup last year. And after doing a report on him, a lot of people from Malayan football, sorry, they sort of reached out to me like agents and whatnot. And so I just try and be honest and say I'm not in a position at the moment where I can relay anything. But if we
Hmm.
got the connection, it could be beneficial in the future. Do you know, if we make connections and stuff like that and share information. So these are just all the different ways you've got to try and be creative with it.
Yeah, that Mali team, I was watching a lot of their highlights from the U17s, and they were unbelievable. A lot of those kids from the JMG, I think it's the Bamako Academy, is big, and they've got a lot of ballers. So definitely a place to keep an eye on. With like scouting, like you hinted at it a little bit, but I'm curious, like you're talking about picking a niche and doing these reports, and it's on top of your other scouting and non-scouting work as well. Like, do you see these just as kind of like a passion piece to say, hey, I want to learn more about it, or like for anybody listening who might have similar aspirations, do you see that there are like practical uses where it's like, hey, this is something that this knowledge, this information, this work I'm doing, these relationships, like could lead to something more substantial in the future?
Yeah, just like you were saying, the latter about being more substantial in the future. I've had like bits of freelance work in Eastern Europe, so people who know sort of UK football know how difficult it is to get work permits and all that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. So normally a lot of the footballers will go to Eastern Europe first and then have to sort of filter across. And so I've had little bits of freelance work with some big teams in Eastern Europe where they've liked certain reports. So then they've maybe questioned me a little bit more just to make sure that I have an understanding on a certain area. And then once that sort of relationship's built, then they've asked me questions about like the fees, what fee would I sort of see
Mm.
as being
And
accepted?
valuation and stuff. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people use there's a software called Transfer Room.
Okay.
So a lot of people link up on there about potential transfers and all this sort of thing. And I know I had a recruitment. He just kind of gave me feedback where he said, "I like this report you did. I want this feedback on a player." And then he said one of the reasons why he liked the report was because on the reports I do, I normally put what sort of finances I'd expect around that player. And he said that on Transfer Room, the club have actually listed their transfer fee. And he said, obviously, it's slightly inflated to begin with, but he
Mm-hmm.
suspects that it will be around what I'd mentioned. So that's one of the reasons why I caught his attention in the beginning. So yeah, just hope you just got to keep building networks and hope that something comes in the future, haven't you?
And that's the valuation, the financial pieces where everything gets really interesting because you can identify dozens, hundreds of quality players, pass them on, formally, informally, but then it comes down to the players' goals, the agents, what's
Yeah.
involved, and then it's that, and that's something I've always thought about too. Like, how do you kind of like how do you try to get a grasp of those valuations? Because you can say, okay, this is a footballer of this level, but when you talk about fees and that, like you're talking about a lot of other elements that are off the field and economics, what clubs can afford, what maybe is it comparing? Like how do you try to come up with those estimates and what factors go into that?
Yeah, it's difficult. Again, it's sort of using your network. Sometimes, I mean, I'm in a lot of scouting groups where, like, I know they're probably interested in a player from that league, and they've asked a scout from another league's asked what sort of wages they think certain teams are on, just so you can get a kind of feel for what they'd think the wages would end up being. But a lot of the time, it's just agents as well. If you speak with agents, they might know certain details on whether a player would like to move and all this sort of stuff. I know it kind of gets frowned upon in the media where a lot of people say about tapping up with first team players, where they say
Hmm.
you should be going to the club first. But I know that most of the time it's normally the agent kind of lets you know if they'd be up for it or not. And then after, then you kind of, the clubs would sort it out amongst themselves as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I don't think I understand it that well. It's a little different from like the typical like American system of transfer. Like we obviously do have it in MLS, but like the typical is trades, right? And that all goes through teams. I remember like when I first started really getting interested in football, just that concept of, oh, you just pay for a guy, you don't have to give another player, you just pay for him, is interesting. And it seems to me like it makes sense because it's yeah, you have to agree a fee with the club, but if the player's not going to go, and it depends on their contract status as well, but that seems like a pretty big factor in the equation, which is really fascinating. So yeah, do you find that like when you're talking to agents or people, like how do you kind of try to develop a relationship or gain trust with people?
Yeah, kind of. It's a tricky one to figure out. You kind of like know over time. I know that there's a couple in England, for example, where I've ended up doing work for them in the future just because we've gained a good relationship, and so they've then asked me to do freelance work where you look for a player, but it's kind of one of them where you've got to trust what they say at the time, maybe take it with a pinch of salt, and then if they keep coming back, um, what's the word I'm looking for? If they keep meeting sort of what they say they'll do and
Mm-hmm.
honor it, then you kind of take them. There's an agent that I'm quite ended up being quite decent friends with, and kind the reason why I trusted him so much is because when we were looking for players at one of the other clubs I worked for in a first team setting, I asked about players being available, and he said he had a player available, but normally other agents would have pushed the player on to say, because they want the opportunity. Whereas he was saying the player is available, but I don't think he's ready for that level. I kind of want him to play the level below to get him sort of first team football all the time and then hope he makes the jump up. And then little things like that, you think, well, he's actually looking after the players.
Yep.
He's sort of looking after, he's not just thinking about the incentive and whatnot. So then you kind of build trust upon that. So it's for me, it's more sort of like you take it with a pinch of salt. I know a lot of the times as well, if someone says they'll wait for you on a certain offer, I mean, if a better offer comes up, they'll take it because
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
the way the football world. You can't hold anyone
Yeah.
against it, can you? So
Yeah. Yeah. Again, you're talking about things that remind me of like long term, right? Like long term relationships, a long term view like that agent had. And if you're going to have success, then you need to do it over time and not just that quick fix. So, speaking of longer term, like what would be a kind of a dream role for you, or what's something that you kind of envisioned your career hoping to be?
any sort of scouting role, analyst role. I've just started a performance analyst internship as well, which is interesting. The only problem is I can't announce. I'm waiting for the confirmation to announce like that I've got this role at this team. But I've been doing that for sort of a month and a half, and I really enjoy that as well. A lot of the opposition stuff now that I was talking about previously, a lot of the top teams now, their analysts kind of cover the opposition side of
Mm.
things as well.
Okay.
So um, there's a little bit of that feeds into it, and then that's a bit more interested in the sense you're with the team on a day-to-day basis rather than sort of being the man on the outside. So training days, first team days. So you feel a bit more sort of a part of the match day, if that makes sense. So any kind of analyst scouting roles like that, I'm interested in doing in the future.
Yeah, yeah, like you said, with those, you feel a bit more, I guess, a little bit more like connected into the result and like, hey, I was a part of this, of helping the team prepare for the match and tracking that. So that I can definitely see where that would be a place you'd want to go. Is it normally like at the kind of the levels you're operating at? Is it like at what level does it become like more exclusive where it's like, hey, you can only be with one club in one role? Obviously, there's like a financial and compensation piece that goes into all of this, but just like the depth of leagues and opportunities, not only within England and the UK in general, but then freelance options abroad. Like, how does that generally go? With a lot of the scouts, who I imagine are doing similar, like wearing multiple hats, like yourself.
Yeah, I know a lot of the scouts sort of who were first team at big European clubs. Obviously, they won't be doing more than what they're doing at that one team because the full time. But so what I normally try and do is obviously be open with the teams, ask if I can do these other roles, and then see how sort of open they are to it. And then obviously it depends on if it's a conflict of interests. Obviously, if
Mm-hmm.
I'm working for an academy in the championship, it's not going to affect like when I've done work with Barrow, it's not going to affect
Right,
Leeds.
just because of the difference of levels and that. Yeah,
And
yeah.
then even sometimes they actually prefer it. With Preston, I did some work and we sort of had the manager and me had a good relationship with the head of recruitment, the academy, just because I'd already done work with Preston before. And so it actually can work as a beneficial thing as well. So it just so for me, if someone was looking at doing sort of multiple roles, just kind of being open and honest with the people you're doing it with that you were looking to
Mm-hmm.
do it and then making sure that you're not going to get a role that's conflict of interest. Obviously, there was even so we did some work with Barrow, and I was still doing work with Warrington, and with Barrow we were covering certain leagues and teams, and I just asked, can I make sure that it's just not conflicting with Warrington because I'm still doing work with them and whatnot, and they sort of honoured that. So just being open and honest, the best, and obviously make
Mm-hmm.
sure it's conflict of interest.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome, man. Cool. Yeah, it's very interesting, and like you're getting to. It's like you're at a stage where you're just getting to try out a lot of different sections and areas within the scouting role and at different levels. So I imagine that it's been quite a ride for you.
Yeah, just keep taking opportunities. I know there's like that was kind of like the big thing with me is this kind of times with time scaling where you're thinking, can I make it work? Can I not make it work? And that's kind of like a difficult decision. But if you can get opportunities and you just take them, I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't like it down the road and you want to change, then you can always do so. But keep saying yes to as many opportunities as you can, and then you keep getting all
Mm-hmm.
these different experiences come from it. So
Cool. All right. Very cool. So we're gonna definitely have some links to your LinkedIn so that we can check out all the reports you've been doing and just kind of watch your career go. Hopefully, we can see an announcement about that newer unofficial role in the near future too. But the way that we like to wrap up all of the episodes of the podcast is, could you complete the sentence "because football"?
yeah, because football, we get to learn about all these different cultures and countries we wouldn't otherwise know, meet all these new people, and obviously get all these different experiences. So that's because football for me.
Brilliant. I very, very similar interest, man. It's a great way to connect with people and learn about different places. And you're getting some really interesting material with the different nations of West Africa that you've chosen too. So really, really fascinating. Look forward to seeing more of your work coming out and wish you the best. So,
You too.
appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate it, James. It was great chatting. And everybody else, thank you very much for watching, for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Stay tuned.